In the previous video I was showing a simple piece of software that I'd written to compare the two sets of ROM dumps that I have for this HP9830A desktop calculator. The set at the bottom here are the ones from the emulator that I was looking at, and the set at the top are the ones that I derived from the ROM card in my actual machine, and I was comparing them ROM to ROM to see if there were any differences, and found that there were differences in several of the ROMs. As it turned out, the software identified that there were several differences in each of 3 pairs of ROMs, and then what I wanted to do was to see if those differences were just simple code changes that had been made over the years, or if there were errors in the actual ROMs. And I thought the best way to do that, or at least a way to get some degree of certainty, was to try to use this data that I'd got from my machine in the emulator. It's a very good emulator, so in theory it will treat the dump files exactly as it would ROMs if it was a machine. But I didn't show the emulator, and a few people have asked if I could actually show that, so that's what I'm going to do in this video. It's not mine, I didn't write it. Hopefully no one's going to have any copyright issues. I'm not making any claims that I have anything to do with it, other than I'm using it as a tool to investigate the ROM data from my machine. But it's quite an interesting emulator, so you might find it interesting just to have a look at anyway. It is still available for download, but what I'll do now is just show what happens as I copy each of my ROM images across into the emulator to replace the proper ones that come with the emulator. Okay, so this is how the emulator looks with the official set of ROM images that came with it. As you can see, it works very nicely, does exactly what you'd expect it to do. Everything works, all the functions work. Even the tape drive works as well. The designers even simulated the fan noise, which is quite nice. But as you can see, it's working fine. So what I'll do now is start to replace the ROM images with the ones that came from my machine and see what the effects are. Okay, so here I've replaced ROM 1, and as you can see, it still works fine. So it appears that ROM 1 from my machine is exactly the same as the one for the emulator, and actually works. So that means in theory, if I did the reverse and put the image from the emulator into my machine, I'd get exactly the same results as I'm getting now. Okay, now each time I start the emulator, for some reason it makes this beeping noise. My machine actually does this when the microcode generator is not working, but the only way I can get the emulator to start up properly is to hit the stop key. I've now replaced ROM image 2, but now when I hit the stop key, instead of the machine starting up as it should, I get this. Okay. Obviously there's an issue with ROM 2, and that bears out in the comparison software that I showed in the previous video, where ROM 2 was shown to have a difference from the emulator files. So now I'll try ROM 3. I'll put ROM 2 back to its proper image so that the emulator works, and then I'll try swapping ROM 3. Okay, so I now have images 1 and 3 from my machine installed. I had to put the original ROM 2 image back. As you saw, it wasn't working with that. But now with 1 and 3 from my machine installed, again, it seems to be working fine. I'm not going to check all the functions. It's really, my machine's dead, so I want to see if there's any life in these ROM images at all. Okay, so 3 seems fine, so I'll move on and swap 4. Okay, so that's 1, 3 and 4 from my machine installed, and again you can see that it's still working fine. It's still responding, it's not doing anything peculiar. So I'll try image 5. Okay, image 5 is installed, and again it's still working exactly as it should. So on to image 6. Okay, image 6, and still working fine. Okay, that's interesting. So it looks like there may be an issue with image 6, although it seems to be running to a certain degree. It is doing strange things when I try to do certain functions. Now this is not a big issue. Once the machine's up and running, I can trace this through in code, but what I'm trying to do is get the machine running to a certain point. But even so, it shows that we do have an error, at least one error in image 6. So I'll put the original image 6 back and try copying image 7 across. Okay, so I've restored the original image 6 and I've got my machine's ROM 7 installed. And we can see it's working fine. So that's at least 3 ROM images that are causing problems from my machine. So I'll try the 8th one, and I haven't pressed the stop key yet, but as you can see the machine is totally dead. So no life in it at all. Now interestingly, the emulator is so good that the rewind key, even though the machine is dead, still works, and that's what my machine does. Because the rewind key is for some reason directly wired to the tape drive boards, then it tends to bypass the software and the firmware, and it always works as long as the hardware hasn't got any gross errors. So it gives a lot of confidence in the emulator, but you can see that with image 8 installed, the machine is totally dead. So I'll put the original image 8 back and try the final image 9. Now if you remember, image 9 is nothing more than the top 256 bytes of the first ROM in the machine, so I don't think there'll be any problems with it, but we'll give it a go and see what happens. Okay, that's with image 9 copied across. I've restored image 8 to the original. And we can see it's now working as it should. So it looks like, firstly, the process I'm using to generate these images is working fine. There are no byte offsets or errors introduced. And I did reverse the process and reconstruct the original code from my images, and it came out exactly as the source read. So that looks fine. But it looks like there are problems with 4 of the ROMs, or one of the 4 pairs of ROMs. Each of the ROMs we're talking about here is actually a pair of ROMs on the machine, apart from ROM 9, which is part of ROM 1. But I thought you might be interested in seeing this process. Again, it gives me some confidence that the problem that I'm having here may just be ROM related. I've been through the machine hardware many times now, and I doubt a lot of issues. There may still be a few hardware problems, but because the firmware doesn't run on the emulator at all, although it's running here, if I put the faulty ROMs in place, which is what the machine has, then it doesn't run. So I can be fairly confident that if I had a working set of ROMs, then I may well be a big step forward to getting the machine repaired. So that's the next step. In the next video I'll look at the replacement ROM card and see if I can get that working. If I can get it working on my test jig, I'll plug it into the machine and see if it brings any life to it. As ever, any comments or advice would be welcome.